The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tammy Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tammy Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tammy, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Today on the Naturally Inspired Podcast, we have Weld County Sheriff Steve Reams joining us. Sheriff Reams began his career with the Sheriff's Office in 1997. He has held many positions in both detention and patrol, so he has a deep understanding of the day-to-day operations and all the parts of a sheriff's office. I wanted to talk with Sheriff Reams today because we are in a time when many people do not feel adequately represented by their government. There is a lot of uncertainty around mandates, around laws, and all these changes that seem to be coming down the pipeline. So I hope my conversation with the sheriff sheds some light on things, and I hope it will inspire everyone to get involved in local government because our voices really do matter. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Naturally Inspired Podcast with Sheriff Steve Reams. I want to thank you for coming on today. Thanks for being on the Naturally Inspired Podcast. I'm dying to talk to you because I have never been so aware of how much I don't know.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
Yeah. You kind of sail through and you think, well, everything's taken care of. Things are going well. I got no problems. It's okay. Yeah, maybe I don't like this here or maybe I don't like that there, but it's not too bad. Right. But when then 2020 came and it was
an opportunity to look at things from a little different perspective.
Yes. And I think that's a positive thing.
I think that's one good outcome of COVID. I mean, there's not a lot, but I think people got more engaged. I don't know if they necessarily got more thoughtful, but they got more engaged.
Right. Maybe the thoughtful part's coming. We can be positive.
I'm a realist. I'm not an
Steve, tell me a little bit about yourself first before we get going here. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. I lived there in the Texas Panhandle, and I moved up here in 1995 to go to school and kind of, get a fresh start in a different state. My dad and I had vacationed up here a few times throughout my childhood, and I always thought Colorado would be a neat place to live. And I got a flyer from UNC somewhere along my high school career, and for sure I thought Greeley was in the mountains. I didn't do a lot of research, and either way, I moved to Greeley and went to college there at UNC for a few years, and then got on at the sheriff's office. And the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. Did you know that you wanted to be in law enforcement from early on?
My attraction to law enforcement is a little, I guess it's a little strange. My mom and dad got divorced when I was pretty young, and my mom got remarried to a man that was an abusive alcoholic. And so at an early age, me and my stepbrothers and stepsisters would frequently call 911 to try to restore order into my home. And, I guess you can look at that in two ways. I always looked at the cops as heroes, and got to know them probably more than I should. And then as I got older, when the time came to start thinking about careers, I was always drawn to that. And so when I came up here to go to school, I wasn't having a lot of fun at the University of Northern Colorado. I was a business major, and I wasn't enjoying that much. And I thought, I should try law enforcement. And the sheriff's office was hiring, and so I got my foot in the door.
Awesome. That's a really cool story. That's really cool. Greeley, yeah. I mean, we're not exactly a mountain town, are we? We can see the mountains.
Good enough. Hindsight being 2020, I'm really glad it's not in the mountains. I like living where I live. So.
Yeah, I guess. What capacity did you start off at in the sheriff's department?
When I applied here, I applied as what's called a master control operator. So I sat in a little room in the jail and I just opened doors for the detentions deputies
Oh, okay.
remotely. So I did that for about 5 months, and like I said, that was my foot in the door. And then I transferred into the jail proper as a detentions deputy, and just kept going.
Really? So you just like homegrown, worked your way up?
Absolutely. There's only a couple of positions inside the sheriff's office that I haven't held. I wasn't an animal control officer, and I was never the under sheriff. But outside of that, I've held pretty much every rank inside of the
Mm,
agency.
I like that. So you have a true understanding of how things roll there, like
Yeah,
firsthand.
probably more so than I should in some areas. Yeah,
One thing I wanted to ask you about is what's the difference between the sheriff's department and the police department? Um,
sure.
some people may not know that. I know, there's a lot of talk about sheriff's departments right now because it feels like the sheriff's department's the people's ally.
Sure. Well, the biggest difference is the head of each agency. As the sheriff, I'm elected. That's why they call it an office. So we always refer to it as the sheriff's office, not a department. And then a police chief is appointed by a city council, city manager, mayor, whatever the case may be, and they're a department of the city. So I don't answer to anyone but the citizens of Weld County. My budget is set by the county commissioners, but I answer directly to the citizens. In a police department, the chief answers to the city council, who then in turn answers to the citizens. So, I'm allowed to be a little more outspoken because I'm an elected official,
Mhm.
and so that kind of drives our policing to be a little different. We tend to have more of a community-based drive, I guess, in most sheriff's offices. And then on top of that, the sheriff of each county is responsible for maintaining a jail, maintaining the courts, so taking prisoners to and from the courts, providing security to the courts, and
Okay.
then also we serve civil process, so eviction notices, those kind of things.
Okay.
And I issue concealed weapons permits. And a little known fact, I'm also the fire warden for the county.
Oh, I did not know that. Many, many, many duties.
Yes.
You guys don't do traffic stops, though, do you? Or do you?
Yeah, we do traffic
You do
stops.
traffic
We're
stops.
probably the leading agency that you're likely to get a traffic contact from. Now, that's a philosophical difference. There are some sheriff's offices that do not enforce traffic because they leave that to the role of state patrol.
Okay.
Uh, but Weld County is a 4,000 square mile county, and there's just not enough troopers here to provide the level of traffic enforcement that's probably needed for the county.
Okay. Well, what is the climate like in the sheriff's department these days? I know, we're facing crazy times and
Sure.
the media is feeding that at an, incredible rate. So, what's your climate like in the office?
Well, generally, I would say the climate here is very good. The citizens of Weld County are very supportive of law enforcement for the most part. Now, that doesn't negate what the deputies are seeing on TV. They know what's happening around the country, and,
Yeah.
and probably what's been more detrimental is watching what's happening down at the state capitol. The rhetoric that's coming from some of the legislators down there in these efforts to provide what they would call police reform,
Yeah.
these sweeping changes that really don't make they don't make law enforcement they don't make the law enforcement environment better, not for the cops or for the citizens,
Right.
but it's this reactionary thing that happens down at the state capitol. And then if you throw COVID in on top of everything, that's a lot of burden. The jail deputies have definitely had a rough year with COVID being an issue that we're trying to combat inside the facility. So
Yeah.
it's tough circumstances, but no one comes into this job without the desire to help others and serve others. So when times get tough, we tend to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just keep going. So
Yeah.
it's as good as it can be.
Right. How has some of this new legislation that they're trying to force in, has anything changed for you? Are you guys treating calls differently? What's
Yeah.
happening?
So yes, the easy answer to that is yes, very much so. There's been
Okay.
a lot of sweeping change and more to come. In this last legislative session, Senate Bill 20-217 was passed, and that was uh, it was couched as a police reform act or police accountability act. and it had certain provisions in, like the elimination of chokeholds, which most agencies had already done as part of their arrest standards. But it
Right.
also redefined what use of force looked like and what those engagements would be. Um, it mandated the wearing of body worn cameras, which is okay for an agency that can afford it. But I think most critically, it took away a provision called qualified immunity. So officers typically had had the ability to go out and do proactive law enforcement and make those split second decisions without putting all their personal gain, their personal wealth on the line for those decisions. So
Right.
if they did do something wrong, they would be indemnified from being sued in a personal capacity.
Okay.
Senate Bill 217 removed that provision and allowed for officers to be sued on a personal level for a mistake they may have made while in the line of duty. A
Oh.
lot of people would say, "Hey, that's putting officers, money where their mouth is," or something like that. But that's a person who hasn't walked a minute in officer's shoes and had to make the
Right.
decisions that we make.
Right. That could really restrict how you react, could delay reaction. You could, not be quick enough to respond in certain situations. That's
Absolutely.
have you lost officers over that?
Yeah, I've lost, I would say, about 6 patrol deputies in the last 6 months who have left the state to go pursue law enforcement jobs in other areas.
Mhm.
I've had jail deputies quit as well, just because of the nature of their job. I mean, they're in a very uh, closed area with a lot of
Mhm.
offenders who may be highly litigious, and you start looking at, hey, I have to have this job for my livelihood, and the risk that an officer faces is sometimes overwhelming. Most have stuck with it, but yeah, there's been those that are typically on the front end of their career. They know that they have an opportunity to shift gears and go somewhere else, and a lot of those folks have taken that opportunity,
Wow.
unfortunately.
Wow. I wanna talk about the chokeholds you mentioned
Yeah.
because, that doesn't make any sense to me. So my son trains in martial arts.
Mhm.
Um, Chokeholds are actually a great tool to submit somebody without doing any real damage.
Yeah, that is true. So we've taught several what we call lateral vascular neck restraints. So it's basically just that. It's a submission hold,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, sometimes those holds aren't applied right. So we had pretty much removed the use of any of those types of moves unless it was a life or death situation for the officer. Which, ironically, the bill still provides for. If it's a life or death situation, you can pretty much do whatever you have to do to survive. But for that routine encounter, if there is such a
Right.
thing, that particular hold, like if you're trying to subdue a prisoner, trying to subdue a suspect, that's off the table, and that's directly as a result of the George Floyd incident.
Right. 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 I mean, we're seeing a lot of very reactionary things happen because of that one incident.
Well, and ironically too, Senate Bill 217 is probably the most sweeping change that any law enforcement officer has seen in the state of Colorado, and it's led the nation. There's no other nation that has legislation that came through like what we saw in last year's cycle. I'm sure other states will catch up if they're being controlled by Democrat representatives and senators, but we were the first, so we're paving a path, and I'm not sure it's a very good one.
Right, right. We've certainly seen this kind of blue wave take over the state of Colorado. I've been here, I got here first in '95 from Canada, and then I left for a few years and came back, and there was a dramatic change.
Oh
Just
yes,
yeah,
I've been in
dramatic
the States
change.
yeah, I came here in '95 as well, and when I moved here, I thought, man, Colorado's a lot like Texas, especially
Right.
Weld County. Very
Yep.
conservative values, very agriculture, very oil and gas friendly, and it couldn't be more different from that now if it tried.
Right. Yeah, and, um, well, I'm not sure how people are faring. How do you feel like the public is faring this kind of change? Are you seeing, like, younger people are fine with it? Can you pinpoint who's, pushing it or
I think it's more regional. If you're in the Denver metro area, Boulder, any of those places, you look at the state and say, this is exactly what we want Colorado to be. But if you're a person who lives in Weld County, you're
Yeah.
used to that rural lifestyle, and don't necessarily love the hustle and bustle of the city. You understand where your groceries come from, and you understand that it takes oil and gas to power your vehicles and pretty much produce life.
Right.
Then you look at this and say it doesn't make a lick of sense. And I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
I don't know how any of the policies that have recently come out of Denver are helping me to be to be a more prosperous person in this state.
Right. It's and this talk about unity, um, that just feels like complete, BS.
It's like a
Because
slap in the face.
yeah, it certainly does to me. I don't know how we don't, how we can unify if we don't have freedom, right? I mean, freedom should be our unifying um, principle. But there's this very in your face push to restrict freedoms from the highest level, right? We're seeing executive orders come down that just take away freedoms. And well, let's talk about the mandates. Right? I mean, first of all, there's so much misinformation around mandates. It's kind of mind blowing, right?
Yeah, we've been combating that for the last year now, or at least close to a year, when the governor was given the authority through the emergency declaration to start issuing these executive orders. And it's been a confusing point for most of the public because they think the governor can just write laws as he goes.
Yes.
That's not what these are. These mandates are. I like to tell people they're strong suggestions.
Hmm.
They can definitely affect businesses who are licensed through the state and that kind of stuff. But as far as having the rule of law, they just don't.
Right. And that needs to really, that information needs to get out there because um, a mandate does not carry the same weight as a law.
That is very correct. And even when we've had these discussions, we try to talk with the mainstream news channels. That they've picked it up. I'll say marginally, and said, well, yeah, even the governor has said that these executive orders, most of them don't have an enforceable component to them. But in the same breath, they'll turn around and say, "But you should wear a mask. You should do this. You should do that." And here are the
Right.
consequences of not doing it. So the general public just doesn't understand oftentimes that, like I said, these are strong suggestions. They may be weighted in science, they may not be, but at the end of the day, law enforcement gets stuck into a really tough spot trying to
Right.
figure out how to navigate those waters. It's just
Right.
one more way to make us the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. I see a lot of passing the buck here. That's what I see. A whole lot of passing the buck. It's like, okay, so let's be clear. Who can you be arrested for not wearing a mask?
Technically, I guess there is a possibility if a city or municipality or even a county were to in turn adopt an ordinance saying, "Hey, we're requiring people to wear masks in public." I guess that could happen. It's not going to happen without extra steps being taken. The health uh, members of health departments could seek charges for a person who refused to follow a health order,
Okay.
but simply not wearing a mask in public and having the risk of law enforcement come in and swoop you up and take you to jail is slim to none. Um,
Okay.
Private businesses, that's a little different.
Right.
Every private business can choose who they're going to cater to or serve to.
Right.
So those issues complicate things a little more. But at the end of the day, I guess the simple answer is no. It's very unlikely without a lot of extra work behind it.
Right. So there's this, it says in the order that there's $1,000 fine or up to a year in jail for not wearing a mask. Who's set that up? Who voted on that?
Nobody.
Hmm.
That's by executive order, and that's the problem with all of these. Is you can throw this stuff out, and it's a scare tactic. And
Yeah.
like I said, the governor's even got on TV and admitted that these aren't enforceable. But you word it the correct way, and most citizens will say, "Well, I'm a follower of the rules, follower of the
Yeah.
law,"
Right.
and so follow along. And here we are.
Right. So this is kind of how something gets started, and then maybe becomes implemented as a law eventually, correct? I mean, would this come down to a vote
So,
before?
that's honestly one of the fears we've had, that, this is going on and on and on.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, we're a year into an emergency, almost a
right.
year in. How long can we stay in emergency orders?
Well, so the legislature convened last year under the pandemic. They convened to pass a budget bill and give us a few of these great laws that they passed in 2020. They will be convening again in February, or February 16th. So if someone wanted to take these executive orders and actually codify them and make them into law, those legislative sessions would be the place to do it. And
Mm,
interestingly enough, it doesn't appear that any of these issues are being listed as proposed bills. So if it's that necessary, if it's that long term, it should have been done that way, through a vote, at least a vote of the legislature, so that there's dialogue and discussion around it and
right,
evidence,
right.
instead of these governor's
Testimony.
edicts. Yeah. So honestly, I don't know how long this will trickle on, but at some point, the emergency declaration has to end, and by that time, or when that occurs, all these mandates should go away as well.
What can we do to keep our finger on the pulse of that, to make sure that that doesn't get slid in at the last minute on the 16th, and all of a sudden this is, passed? Because I've actually been down to the Capitol and listened to bills about vaccinations.
Mhm.
Sunday night session,
Yes,
late at night, last minute.
yeah, I understand that. Yep. Senate Bill 217 was passed in one of those sessions. During a limited time where people could go down and testify. So
Yeah,
I would love to be able to tell your listeners that they could just, they could check the website for the Capitol and have an idea of what's coming. But
yeah,
I'd be lying to them if I said that, there wasn't some, what I believe to be underhanded scheduling, or emergency scheduling, as they'll call it. So without having a trusted source down at the Capitol, without knowing who your representatives and senators are that are sending out messages through social media and that kind of stuff,
mhm,
you're pretty uninformed on most of
yeah.
this. It takes being plugged in to the people that you trust down at the state Capitol in order to know what's going on, and be given any kind of heads up.
Right. And that right there should be a red flag. See, there's people that are still listening to the mainstream media and taking everything at their word and thinking this is all legit and our government would never do this to any kind of foul play. They wouldn't use a good crisis to their own benefit. This is some people's thinking. And that right there, letting you know that you need to be engaged. You need to, know who your representatives are so that you can actually be informed. That right there should be a red flag.
Well, anytime that a legislator is not willing to publicly debate their bill, or publicly post their bill so that people can read it and get an understanding of it before they go down and testify, to me, that's a big red flag. If you're proposing a law that is so good for the citizens that it needs to go to the House of the legislature, you should be willing to take that same bill in any form, draft or whatever, and make it available to the public, so that people can see the work that you're doing. That
Right.
should be something that you're proud of, not something that you're hiding from the citizens.
Right. These executive orders, they really feels, and speaking with some of in my community, people really feel like the Constitution is under attack these days. And there's other states now. I just read this morning that Utah, I think it is going to stop issuing concealed carry permits. They're just going to let people do it.
Oh, just
Yeah,
let them carry
just let them
constitutionally. Yes.
carry. So some
Yeah,
states are getting ahead of this because they
right.
feel like, okay, so the First Amendment totally under attack, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm in health and wellness, and I follow a lot of natural health leaders. Their pages have been completely silenced. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s page was taken down yesterday. They're not playing around, and this feels like a different country in many ways because of the censorship and the violations against the First Amendment. The Second Amendment, we have people in administration that have said They support buybacks. They, people do not need guns. These are all warranted, feelings, I think, by the public that the Constitution is under attack.
I have to agree with them. I can tell you that in June, in the height of, well, I wouldn't say the height of the pandemic, but in the middle of the pandemic, I guess, we started seeing quite an uptick of people coming in to either apply for a concealed weapons permit or renew their permit. And the numbers were significantly increasing. And I went and spoke with the county commissioners at that time and said, look, there's a big fear here. I think any barrier we can eliminate so that people can get their concealed weapons permits, we should. I worked with the commissioners to lower our fees down to what the state charges, which is $52.50. We don't charge a surcharge on top of that. And since that time, we've seen a dramatic increase in concealed weapons permits. We went from issuing about 100 new ones a week to about 100 new ones a day sometimes.
Oh my gosh.
So the amount of folks who are in that boat that you were speaking of, they're worried about their gun rights being restricted. They're worried about the ability to protect themselves, not because of COVID, but because of how the government is using, or how members of the government are using COVID to advance their agenda. And, whether you're watching mainstream media or not, you can't help but turn on the TV and see some of the dramatic shifts that are happening and the silencing of certain people, to include our former president on social media platforms.
Yeah, that was one thing that, I think through this whole process, I've really been made aware of, is that how little the president has of power, how little power he actually has. Like, he can't stop himself from being removed off of social media. Our corporations are in power here.
Well, at least on those platforms, they most certainly are. If that doesn't bother the normal citizen, it should, because whether you agree with the president or not, there are a lot of things that begin to look like a publicly used utility, a publicly used forum, and then suddenly, you end up in Facebook jail, or you end up banned from Twitter for a little bit, and then you see when the most powerful person in the United States gets that same treatment. That's worrisome.
Yes. Yeah. In addition, there's the argument kind of goes on and on about, these platforms like Facebook and Instagram and whatnot. I think what people don't know is that these platforms have been funded by government paying tax dollars. And so it's one thing when you say, oh, these are private businesses, they can choose who they serve and who they don't serve. Well, not with our own tax dollars.
Yeah, as of late, I can't imagine too many businesses that haven't had some kind of relief from the federal government. And again, who's paying the bill for all this?
Yeah.
I would argue that if those businesses are receiving tax dollars, then they should be accessible to all citizens, because we all pay taxes.
Exactly.
The logic there is broken. But it's not a matter of fairness in government. Sometimes it's who controls the power. And right now, conservative voices are not in control.
Right. The one thing that is going to dramatically affect a lot of people, I think, is the airlines. The airlines have been, it's no secret, they've been bleeding money for years, and we've been pouring money into them, especially lately through the CARE Act. We've given them a lot of money to stay running, and they are militant about their mandates and restrictions. Absolutely militant. And at what point, who is going to stand up for the people? These are our tax dollars funding these operations, and we may get to a point where a big portion of the population won't be permitted to fly.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there. And looking at some of the stuff that's been happening just in the local business world, and how business has been shut down because the owner had a choice: am I going to continue to serve customers, or am I going to shut down and lose my business forever? And then the state comes and strips their liquor license away. Well, you apply that to a much bigger platform like the airline industry, and the risk that these people have for potentially losing any business if they don't comply with some kind of federal government edict, then yeah, they end up becoming very militant in the way they enforce these mask mandates or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to me that if you wear a mask on an airplane, but you're sandwiched in a small metal container, that's supposed to make. I mean, if we're going to trust the science, let's just be realistic. The science behind any of that, it obviously can't make sense.
Right. But there's such a disconnect there, there's such a disconnect in, not being able to, okay, so you can go into a restaurant with a mask on, sit down, take your mask off and sit there, but you can't go in if you don't like it. There's absolutely the reasoning. And that's what I want to try to get to people through my podcast platform, is to just let's be real about this and think about this, right?
Well,
Because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You can't go
it,
to church and pack into pews, but you can pack into airline seats.
well, I think for me, when I started watching, the I'll say the politics come into play with COVID, and where I saw it the most was honestly in my jail. I got sued early on because I didn't go and advocate for the release of inmates from my jail because they couldn't social distance in a jail, and they were going to catch COVID, and that was bad for the community. And every argument under the sun. Well, even after the lawsuit occurred, and these people were being represented by the inmates were being represented by the ACLU, and were providing them masks. The inmates are still refusing to wear masks. They're still refusing to do a lot of the hygienic stuff to help keep themselves safe. It just
because it's not about that.
No, it isn't
about that.
And as much as people want to say it is, the science doesn't support. The science that they're quoting just flat out doesn't seem to exist.
Right. Yeah, I'm about as sick as I could possibly be with the word science. I'm like, you got people, that took grade 10 biology, and they're lecturing me about science.
We went from
not flying anymore.
No mask, wear a mask every day. Now we're two masks.
Two masks.
And I don't know where any of the data is that's driving these discussions.
How about personal responsibility?
So
right? Do you think we could unite under freedom and personal responsibility?
You would think so. And honestly, my role I see as a sheriff is to not be seen. My role is to try to make the community as safe as possible, and not let, as a government official, as an elected official, I don't want to be in your way. If you don't draw my attention, I don't want to have to interact with you. Yeah. So the whole idea of using law enforcement to go out and enforce mask mandates and all that kind of stuff, it's irrational. The last thing you should want is for government telling you what to do. It's okay for government to give you advice and say, hey, these are the best practices, right. But it's up to the individual citizen to figure that out. And we've lost all this concept of the government's role. We think it's the government's role to protect us and make us safe. And I don't think that's necessarily correct in all forms.
Right. And I think it gets misrepresented too. Like, who wants big government? Right? Like why you got to do some inward work here and figure out why you want to be told what to do.
Well, I think if you look at the COVID shutdown and the limitation of government services during COVID and schools and, just all the different services that you rely on to be provided provided to you through tax dollars, many of those things were limited or became non-existent. So the question has to be asked, do we need those services at all then? If they were restricted or done away with during COVID and no one's really missing them, then do we need them back? I mean, it kind of exposes big government for what it is. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. One of the biggest concerns for people too is what I was mentioning about airlines. Some people might not even be able to fly without these health passports they're trying to introduce and all of that. God forbid they force vaccinate. They try to mandate that in a way where we can't get away from it. Who are they going to go to enforce that? Is that I'm worried for you guys.
Well, honestly, law enforcement tends to be the catch-all or the cleanup agency. Anything from a turtle being stranded upside down on the roadway to telling people to wear masks. And then at the same time, you look at how bills like Senate Bill 217 come into play. So you know, you have legislators who aren't fans of the cops. They pass bills to try to restrict
Right.
what cops can and can't do. But then at the same time, when they
They
need
want you to
something
do the dirty
enforced,
work.
law enforcement to do it. Uh, I don't know what that concept of mandatory vaccination is going to look like. COVID is not equal to something like polio or some other virus that we've seen in years past. COVID is mostly survivable for any member of the public, with probably few short-term effects. There are people that get sick and there are people that die from COVID.
Yeah.
But again, to try to equate it to something like polio and mass vaccination or forced vaccination, it doesn't seem rational.
Right. Right. Do you have, do we have in Weld County, like, could we ever just like say we're banding together here and we're not doing this? Do we have that power through the
I
sheriff's
think Weld
department?
County, I think Weld County has done that to the degree that they know how.
Yeah.
Weld County is not liked by Governor Polis. We're not liked by many members of the legislature because, myself, the county commissioners, and other elected officials in the county push back. We say, no, you're not going to do that. No, that's not constitutional,
Right.
and that's not what lawmakers and the governor are used to hearing. They're used to just getting blanket compliance. So I think most of the citizens in Weld County have stood up for themselves and said, if I want to wear a mask, I will, but if I don't, I'm not.
Right.
And you kind of see that in your daily travels. But legally, and constitutionally, is there a lot that Weld County can do to pull away from the state? Not quickly, not quickly at all.
Mm, that's scary because they can
Yeah.
pass these little mandates or laws or whatever, on Sunday night, late in the darkness when nobody's there, and then
You can take
for us
a
to get around it is a lot
Yeah,
harder.
it's impossible. You can take an issue like oil and gas in Weld County. Proposition 112 was what, 2018 or 2019
Mhm.
uh, vote that we all took on whether or not we wanted to essentially eliminate oil and gas production in the state by forcing setbacks. It failed. That Proposition 112 failed by a good margin in the state of Colorado. And in the very next legislative cycle, the legislators passed law that it effectively ruined the
Put it
oil
in
and gas
place.
industry.
Yeah.
It went exactly against the voters, and those are the things that I think people lose sight of.
Yeah. Well, it becomes overwhelming. Like right now, there's so much in the news right, and I think it's very purposeful. There's so much in the news right now, the average person cannot keep up with it. I mean,
No,
there's stuff coming down the pipeline through social credit scores, through the IMF and banking. You have all this critical race theory stuff being forced down people's throats in the school. You have medical freedoms being opposed. You've got uh, free speech, Second Amendment. Like it's too much.
it is. It is, and the media is, they're stoking the flame at every chance
Yes,
they get. Uh,
yes.
and
Defund the media. Leave our police alone and defund the media, for God's sakes.
I encourage people all the time: if you want to defund the media, turn off your TV.
Yep.
Just quit watching them because that has just the same effect. You don't have to pass a law. You don't have to pass a
Yep.
resolution. You don't even have to. You don't even have to get together and picket anything. Just turn your TV off.
Yeah, that's so true, and that's a good point to bring up is, a lot of people feel helpless right now, like, "I can't make a difference." You actually can,
Yeah,
just go and live your life and model what you wanna see, right? I don't wear a mask because I've done the research on it. I know my risk level. I know what it is. I feel the mask is a lie. I'm not wearing the mask, and if you don't want me in your business, then I'm happy to leave.
I've pretty much adopted the same philosophy. Um, but talking on the same issue, people turning off their TV, choosing where to go. It's been pretty effective in changing the ratings for every
Yeah.
major sport right now. And if people would treat the news the same way, I think the message would get turned pretty quickly.
That's a great point, and you can't affect anything more than voting with your dollars,
Yep,
and
absolutely.
that's how we roll in this country, so don't give them your money, it's not worth it. Um, how are your crime rates? Have we during COVID, have that has that what's happening? You have more crime, less crime? Do you have the same crime, or is it
No,
different?
Unfortunately, we've gone up and we have 22 different categories that we track related to crime in Weld County. And in 15 of those categories, we've seen an increase, sometimes a very substantial
Wow.
increase. Categories like aggravated assault, simple assault, burglary, robbery, um, uh, you name it. Unfortunately, rape, different family offenses. A lot of these have gone up just for the simple fact that law enforcement isn't as available. COVID has obviously changed the world dynamic a little bit. Our economy's taken a big hit, so there's opportunity crime that abounds. People, they're out of a job, they need some kind of income, so they see their neighbors' stuff and they steal it. It's as simple as that. Uh, we always see an uptick in crime when the economy takes a hit, but
Right.
this has been marked. Like I said, we're up about 30% overall in criminal activity that is being
Jeez.
reported, and that's with fewer calls for service in 2020 as compared to 2019. So it's been a tough year.
Mhm.
The folks have been busy, and then you throw 217 on top of it. The rules of engagement are not good for law enforcement, so we have to be much more calculated, much more thoughtful in the way we go about doing things.
Mhm.
And while that sounds good, it's also good for the bad guy in being able to get away or continue to perpetrate crimes.
Right.
Um, I guess one other factor is in the times of COVID, jails, prisons have depopulated. A lot of prisoners have been let go by the courts, and they continue to commit crime. I mean, we've arrested the same offenders multiple times for the same types of crime, and they get released almost as quickly as we can take them to jail. It's really hard to combat crime when the tool of taking a prisoner to jail is removed from your tool belt.
So they're not doing any time for these crimes because of COVID, or doing very little?
So what'll happen let's say we arrest a guy on a burglary charge, we bring him to jail. It's a felony level crime. They'll go see a judge or a magistrate, and typically they're giving those offenders a personal recognizance bond, so they're let out on their own signature and given a court date. Um, that
Oh,
same
no bond. No bond at all.
had no or a very low bond, but typically it's a PR bond, personal recognizance bond. So they're just saying, yeah, I'll show up in court. It's like a fancy ticket, for lack of better terms. We have one offender who we've arrested over 8 times since the start of the pandemic, and I couldn't tell you the total property dollars that he's attached to just on Weld County Sheriff's Office cases. But it took his, I think, eighth or ninth arrest before they finally set a bond, before the judges finally set a bond for him high enough that he hasn't been released yet. So he's still in my facility, but his wave of crime lasted well over a year.
Oh my gosh. Oh boy. I don't even know.
That's
I don't
one of
even know. Like, and we're still technically in this when the emergency orders lifted, will that subside for you guys?
so in the
Because I
emergency
feel
order.
like the emergency order is gotta stop. Like, if we could get that cleaned up and stopped, that we might be able to get back to some kind of sanity.
That that will make a big difference, but unfortunately, the courts have been shut down for most of the last year or two. So you have this backlog of people who need to get to court. That's not going to change. So the courts are still going to have to be pretty. Uh, they're going to have to be pretty creative in how they deal with the amount of arrestees coming in and how many they can process through the court system. So I fear it's going to be this way for a little while, even if the emergency orders are lifted. And at the same time, you have a legislature that's about to convene, and they want to take this COVID-19 time and say, hey, look how well it's been working for the state of Colorado. These arrest standards and releasing of inmates has been so beneficial to the state of Colorado. We should just make this the law. And that's actually a proposal that's going through in this next legislative cycle, is to mandate who and what can come to jail. If the
Oh,
ACLU had their preference, the only folks that would come to jail and be held in jail are those that are here on first, second, or third degree felonies. All else, they would love to just see remain on the street.
oh my gosh. What bill is that? Do you have a number on that?
It's not numbered yet. It's in
Okay.
draft form, but you can bet on February 16th it'll be numbered very quickly and will likely be rolling out.
Good God. Um, Suicides. It just feels like a mess. It just feels like such a mess.
Yeah, suicides they're always difficult. No officer wants to go to those. And there's always been I'll say,
Is that a call the sheriff's department takes care of?
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
call that law enforcement will get called to generally first. So we've always had a an amount of suicides that is concerning in Weld County. When you have
Hmm.
folks that are in that blue collar work environment, sometimes the stresses of the job are a little higher than other walks of life. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and
Yep.
sometimes that gets the best of you. But you take COVID and throw that on top of everything, and job loss and opportunity loss, and yeah, we've definitely had it's been a rough year. Coroner's office has been a lot busier than I think they would have hoped to have been.
I think something people don't know is that the highest rate of suicide demographic is white men.
Yeah.
And, white men certainly get a hell of a deal right now, in my opinion. They can't do anything right. I feel so bad for white men, I tell you. And they carry a huge burden. And this is a demographic that we should be concerned about during this time, because you're right, loss of job, loss of ability to provide for your family. These are huge issues. And we've certainly seen numbers of suicide go up, but they're not done yet, you know?
No, I think the long-term effects of what we're going to see with and if our economy recovers, like I said, none of this is going to be a quick rebound. The law enforcement angle, the crime reporting angle, and then unfortunately the suicide piece, they're not going to turn around overnight.
Mhm.
What we've done to our economy and what we've done to ourselves over the last year is it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
I encourage anyone to come to a ride along with your local law enforcement officer and see what they're seeing, and see the effects of COVID in the eyes of the officers that patrol your streets. And I guarantee you'll get a very different perspective than what you'd see on the mainstream news.
Yeah, that's a great idea. How does someone set up a ride along?
Well, for my agency, it's as simple as calling in and speaking with my public information officer. All his information is posted on weldsheriff.com. But just about any agency is kind of the same way. You call in and talk to their public line, and most every agency will be happy to have you along, because the more citizens know about the work we do, the less they question what we do, because they get that frontline view. If all you ever hear is the bad stuff that gets represented on the
Yeah.
news when an officer makes a mistake, unfortunately, that's what you start to paint every agency with. And there's some very fine men and women who represent law enforcement in this county.
Yeah. Do you guys do the Citizen Academy?
So we've done citizen academies in the past. Obviously, not during the time of COVID. I have some different programs inside the sheriff's office where I invite members of the citizen members to come in and basically kind of become part of our agency,
Mhm.
volunteers. Um, there are a lot of different opportunities. I don't know when we'll get back to doing kind of that citizen academy model, just because of what we've been through in the last few years. But
Right.
we always try to educate the public in any way we can. Tours of
Yeah.
the jail, open forums where people can come in and talk to us about what we do. But we'll see what happens if
Right.
COVID ever goes away.
Yeah. I think it's important now, that especially now more than ever, that people understand their rights. And that
Yeah.
that would be of great interest to me, to just, understand what I'm capable of doing, in certain situations, what's right and what's wrong. Sometimes you don't even know, if what your rights are. So you don't want to overstep anything, but yet you want to be protecting your rights. But if you don't know and you're in this gray area, it's difficult.
Well, I think it's even more complicated with some of the legislation that's being floated,
Yep.
because it looks and feels and probably is in some cases, very questionable as far as constitutionality.
Yeah.
And yet we're supposed to just shake our heads and say, yeah, let's go along with it. As a law enforcement officer, I never thought I'd be standing up for the citizens against a law that was passed by the legislature. But that's the circumstance that I've been forced into several times over the last few years, and
Yep.
it's not healthy.
Yeah. No, and you have to really pay attention to language these days too, because a lot of what the language they use in these bills, it doesn't mean what you think it does. They're not.
It's
It's like they're
very
changing the words definitions. So you
yes.
really have to be, paying attention and asking questions about what the intent is behind it. And I know that even some of the bills that passed this past election period, people voted incorrectly because they didn't understand the language.
Well, and as a Johnstown resident, I'm sure you're very aware of how much property taxes went up
Yeah.
in the last few months, and that's
Mhm.
a direct result of some of the past election stuff. And
Yep.
I
The
always tell
schools
people,
the schools, they ask for more money, it gets shot down. They ask for money, it gets shot down. The kids keep trying it, just keep trying to change things here, and then, finally they'll get it through.
well, and the removal of the Gallagher Amendment allowed property taxes to climb in a way that had never been allowed before. So, it's too hard to know how all these things are going to impact you as an average citizen.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, the place to get educated about it is not in the voting booth. It takes so much time
Right.
vetting what you're voting on, and people just don't have that available to them. They trust their legislators, and sometimes you just can't. A
Yeah.
lot of those people don't have your best interest in mind.
No, I think we're in a transformation period too as a country where nobody can be trusted right now in terms of government.
Yeah,
We have to relearn our system because we've become so disconnected from it. We have to, and that starts in your local area. I mean, we need to start attending our city council meetings. We need to start knowing who's making the decisions and what happens, because it's like I said, we're in a transformation period where it's gotten so messy and corrupt that we have to just start over with getting new people in. Hopefully we can get some term limits put into place. I'm dreaming now.
well, I think what's even more impactful is when the people who vote for a particular representative, city council, whatever it is, when they go and tell that person, "Hey, I want to hear your opinion
Mhm.
on the things that are happening to us. I want to know where you stand on these things." When they
Mm.
encourage them to speak up, because I will tell you, elected officials tend to not want to say a lot and draw heat. But
Right.
if you demand that of them so that you know what they're thinking, you know what they're doing, you may not agree with them all the time, but if you can get them to be vocal about why they're doing the things they're doing, I think that reestablishes a level of trust with the citizens that would be good for all.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, right now you see a lot of, especially conservatives, who they get elected and then they go into hiding almost, and it's frustrating for me to watch because I don't think I fit that bill, but I work with and around a lot of them that do, and it's not good for the citizens that they represent.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think we need to get comfortable again too with standing by what we believe in.
Absolutely.
There's this tendency to like not want to deal with conflict at all. Something's happened in our culture that's changed where if you disagree with someone, it's taboo, like you can't do it anymore. And so as a result, people walk around thinking that everybody agrees with them. And that's not that's not how it is. We should be comfortable having discussions and debates
Sure.
and learning from each other. But I don't see that happening anymore. What I see is I'm not going to talk to you anymore. We disagree. I don't want to hear you. There's this
Well,
disconnect.
in the world of law enforcement, it's really hard to understand how that mindset comes to play, because we have to arrest people, we have to negotiate them into the car, and then we have to figure out how to still have a cordial conversation relationship with them.
Right.
I'll say that is on behalf of sheriff's officers, because we don't have a lot of cover. We're out doing our own thing out in the middle of the boonies sometimes. So um, there is a lot of diplomacy, and I think that word, it's become taboo for a lot of people, and it's not a bad thing to be diplomatic. It's not a bad
No.
thing to be able to be cordial to someone and have a conversation that moves the needle in a positive direction. And
Right.
we've lost that art in many,
Yep.
many ways.
Yep. I totally agree with you. I have to ask you about Weld County and Wyoming. This thing's been floating around for, what, a decade or so, maybe, this idea. And now it's really come reemerged, and there's feels like there might be some traction in it. What do you think?
Well, so I'm not a driver of the Weld County, Wyoming movement, but I understand it.
Mhm.
And I don't know where it formally got its start, but I know that during the times of COVID, it's definitely started to get traction, mostly because, as I talked to you earlier, with the people of Weld County don't feel like they're being represented by those folks down in Denver and Boulder. And in fact, I think they feel like they're being attacked.
Yep.
In my personal life, my world hasn't gotten easier by what's happening down in Denver. And I think the citizens of Weld County have said, or a large portion of them said, we align more with the values of Wyoming. And if Colorado's not engaged in keeping us around, then maybe we'd just rather go to Wyoming. That's the movement they're trying. I don't know how successful it'll be, but it's sending a pretty loud message.
Yeah. What are the obstacles with it, do you see? Do you see any?
Well, I don't think it's been done in any modern time. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of challenges about what does it even look like? Does it go to a vote of the people? Is it a statewide vote? Um, I'm sure it has to clear both legislatures in Wyoming and in Colorado. And
Mhm.
then there's those things that are kind of afterthoughts, like water rights,
Right.
the naming of universities and university funding, and
Where's the
uh,
border at?
yeah,
That's what I wanna know.
property taxes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Wyoming wants to have a border so close to the Denver metro area.
Yeah.
If I were a Wyoming resident, I don't know that I would. I don't know that I'd see this as a good thing for Wyoming. But the Wyoming governor's kind of open to it
That's
through
what I heard.
interview that
Yeah.
he did. Who knows? I'm just going to continue to be the sheriff here, and whether it's in Colorado or Wyoming, hopefully,
You'll
citizens.
be okay with it as long as the Weld
Yeah,
County citizens stay the same.
that's it.
Yeah. How can we support the sheriff's office right now? How can we build our relationship with you guys? Because I feel like you guys are really there for us, and you're an elected person, so that's a really good thing in my opinion. How do we support you guys, and how do we build our relationship with you?
I think the best thing you can do, and it's pretty simple, when you see a law enforcement officer out there, tell them how much you appreciate them. There's there's a old saying, how saying thank you goes a long way, and that couldn't be more true for law enforcement. But posting those positive stories through your social media platforms, telling
Mhm.
the officer you see on the street, thank you. And I guess, a piece that we mentioned a little bit before, get engaged with your local police department. Find out if there's a way you can come do a ride along. Get to know what it is that they do, and you'll automatically become an advocate for that agency, because you'll see the work that they're doing, and
Right.
and you'll look at the story that's coming through mainstream media with a little different lens. All of those things are positive for you and for the community, and mostly for your law enforcement officers. Any of those, any agency, I would assume, would welcome that, especially right now.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. If you really want to know what happens, there's no better way than to go and take a
Yeah,
take a ride along and check it out, because I think you'll be shocked, and maybe even feel a little guilty about how the pressure or the way you judged them in the past, because this is every day dealing with people that aren't pleasant. Nobody's happy to see you come to their house, right?
I've said this
Most of
before.
the time.
No one's ever invited me to their house so that I can, taste the latest cookie recipe they found or something.
Right.
Never that way. I don't.
Right, right. I mean, you're dealing with people in high stress situations, you know,
Yep.
usually intoxicated, maybe on drugs, at the worst points of their life.
Yeah, I've never taken anyone to jail when they said that was the best thing that's ever happened to them. Usually they're at their lowest point in life, and
Yeah.
they're not happy to see you. Now, sometimes that ends up being the best thing that could have ever happened to them was hitting rock bottom. But
Right.
at that particular moment, things are pretty tough for an individual. So we don't get the best of them. We usually get the worst of folks. And despite that, it's still a job that I would never pass up on. It's been a great career for me.
Wow. That says a lot right there. That you love what you do. Where can people connect with the sheriff's office? Where's the
So we
best
have
place?
Yeah, we have a couple of social media sites, Twitter, Facebook, the usuals, Instagram. We always welcome people to get engaged with us on there, kind of find out what we're doing. We put information out on our webpage through weldsheriff.com, but honestly, the best way to get engaged with us is just like I said, come do a ride along, come get to know what it is that we do out there. And we can't accommodate everybody at once, but we can sure take a few at a time.
Yeah. That sounds great. And I definitely encourage everybody to engage, follow them on social media and schedule a ride along. And this is how we're going to band together. And this is how we're going to make change is showing these representatives what we want, right? How
Yeah,
we want to be represented and just living our lives and modeling freedom.
absolutely. Being a citizen is not a sideline sport. You got to have an opinion. You got to get out there and
Right.
be vocal. You've got to, but be professional, be polite,
Mhm.
but let people understand what it's like to live in Weld County and be proud of the fact that you can do it on your own. You don't need the government to tell you how to do it. And that's what Weld County is all about in my mind. And I hope that a lot more citizens take advantage of standing up for themselves, especially when we're coming out of COVID here.
Yeah, I agree. I tell you, I've never been more grateful for Weld County. I am very grateful for your attitude, and I'm very grateful for the citizens of Weld County.
I can't imagine being a sheriff anywhere else. It's been trying, but at least I feel like I have a partnership with the citizens in this county. And I've talked with some of my fellow sheriffs from around the state, and while it's been a tough ride, I'd much rather take the ride that I've been on than what some of them have been on.
I bet. Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for being on the Naturally Inspired podcast today.
You bet. It's my pleasure.
If the naturally inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.